Mr. Duzina's welcome. Thank you for your time, for being here today. In your book, ΣΥΡΙΖΑ in Power, and you're saying accidental politician, you're talking about the idea of left ideology and left power in this modern world of neoliberalism and rise of right ideology. So you think of yourself as an accidental politician?
Yes, I am an accidental politician.
Can you explain that more, because it's really interesting?
Yes, I mean, I went to London to do my PhD in 1974, and then I started my career immediately afterwards. I became a professor pretty early on, professor of law and legal philosophy, and although I kept my links with Greece, I was not involved in any direct way with Greek politics. And then the crisis hit us in 2010-2011, and at that point the Western, the English-speaking media were full of all these stories about the Greeks being lazy and being cheats and being, deserving what happened to them. And I was really angry about that. And somehow I rediscovered my involvement and my interest in Greek politics, and I started writing a number of articles in the Guardian newspaper and various websites defending a very basic fact, that the Greek people are suffering more than anyone else in Western Europe during peacetime. They lost a 30%, almost 30% of their GDP within 5 years. We had unemployment coming to 30%, youth unemployment up to 60%. And all these young men and women who had studied in Greece, they were really brilliant minds, were coming to London to work as bar women and cleaners and so on. And that broke my heart. So I started getting involved again as now a senior professor with a certain recognition internationally, to try and tell a different story from what the mainstream media. And the accidental bit is really something very strange for me, because only in early September, I was in Poland for a conference. I was rang by Athens and they asked me to be a candidate. And I said, no, it's never crossed my mind. I had no interest in becoming a politician. And eventually they persuaded me, after they said that my chance of getting elected was very small.
The case of ΣΥΡΙΖΑ is actually very interesting in this whole global phenomena of rising of right-wing ideology. And how do you see the position of left ideology now, political ideology in Europe?
Okay, that takes us back perhaps a few decades. In 1989, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of Yugoslavia in our part of the world, the left, all kinds and shades of the left, suffered a major defeat. I mean, we, people in the political trajectory that I belong, were always critical of the Soviet Union. However, we saw that the Soviet Union was playing an important balancing role internationally. And of course, Yugoslavia for us, for people of the democratic socialist belief, Yugoslavia was a very important experiment. But we were defeated, and theoretically, some of our models, the two major models that the left developed in the 20th century, the communist model, real existing socialism, as we used to call it, and the social democratic model had failed. And the social democratic model failed when Tony Blair in Britain, then Schröder in Germany, the French socialists and the Greek socialists adopted those neoliberal ideas. The idea that the social state has to shrink, that the major assets in health and education, in social security should be privatized, and that the pensions and the salaries and the working conditions of the working people should be reduced, should be undercut in order to create competitiveness.
That's how we are coming to the rise of right ideology and the right-wing nationalism and so on, because people are searching for these answers in the nationalism and national states.
You're absolutely right. What happened was that when this idea, this economic policy became dominant in the major states of Europe and in Brussels, in the European Commission, we had a period of some 20 years with globalization, with neoliberal policies, with privatization, that people felt exhausted. Unemployment rose, living conditions worsened. The working people felt that they were insecure. Their own future, the future of their families, was no longer guaranteed as it was in Western Europe after the Second World War with the social contract and the social state that had been created. And in that soil of insecurity, of anxiety, of ignorance about your future, right-wing, extreme right-wing ideologies found the necessary environment in which to gain a hold. And of course, having the population flows, the refugees, the migrants coming in, although in absolute terms, it was a very small number of people.
But it was used as an argument of the populists.
It was used because, I mean, take a case like Hungary. Hungary has not received any refugees. However, Mr. Orban claims that he will keep refugees, particularly Muslim refugees, out because he's looking for a European future of a white Christian people.
Isn't that fascism, actually?
I mean, I don't want to use these terms easily, but there's no doubt that we have a return of ideologies of the interwar period that we felt that they were finished. After the Second World War, after the Holocaust, we felt that, you know, that thing was finished. We would never go back. That Europe, I mean, the European Union, that I hope that North Macedonia will soon start negotiations to become a member, was built on two principles. One was prosperity based on solidarity, the richer nations, the richer regions helping the poorer people. And secondly, of course, turning the old national disputes from disputes that lead to wars into a kind of noble economic competition. Both these principles, when neoliberalism rose, were defeated. I explained earlier that not just Greece, Italy, the Spanish people, the Portuguese people, the Irish people.
But now we're seeing that this crisis is spreading towards the heart of the Europe, and we're seeing these insecurities also in Germany, in France. You are a professor at Birkbek University in London, so you can talk maybe.
Brexit.
Yes, Brexit is a perfect example of that.
It is a perfect example.
How dangerous these processes can be in order of European future having in mind?
It is very dangerous, particularly with these European elections coming up, because we have the development of what you could call a black international, a black front. You have this character, Steve Bannon, who was the guru of President Trump, has come to Brussels. He has announced that he's creating a movement to unite all the right-wing forces and take Brussels over. Now, if that were to happen, and these European elections in May are extremely important, then perhaps we could see the demise of the European Union, or of the European Union as we knew it, even in its bad times.
What are your prognoses for the elections?
Well, I'm not a gambling man. I don't want to bet on these things, but we hear that, you know, there's going to be a big increase of extreme right wing at the expense of the right wing, the EPP party. And of course, one of the major problems that we see both in Europe but also in domestic politics is that this rise of the extreme right wing has turned the standard center-right towards the right. Having a candidate, for example, for Spitzenkandidat, Mr. Weber, you know, couple of years ago, Mr. Weber was part of the more extreme right-wing part of the CDU.
You think it was impossible to imagine that he will be a candidate?
It is, or that he will be the president of the Commission.
The president.
Someone that has said all kinds of pretty offensive things over the years, and someone who at this point is moving the center ground of European politics towards those ideas. And we have the ghosts coming back, those ghosts of the past that we thought had been buried. And they were there just for the historians to examine precisely the conditions that led to the rise of fascism and Nazism and so on, that this was a historical matter. And when you see it happening again in the heart of Europe, it is very worrying.
It's hard to prognose the elections and
Sure.
the results, but also apparently it's hard to prognose with Brexit, the solution, because as we're making this interview actually the day after the attempt for deal again failed.
The third failed attempt
failed.
The third, yes.
So maybe you lived in London for many decades,
Yes.
and can you just explain about the Britain society and what was the urge and what was actually the point of all this nonsense?
Okay, let me start by making a wider point. Europe has always been a trauma for British society. Europe has been a diagonal fault line across the whole of society and across the whole of the political system. Those people who felt we are part of the European continent, and those who felt that we're a little island, we're very powerful, we ruled a large part of the world, and we don't want to have anything to do with Europeans. And there is a certain melancholy to the British psyche in the post-colonial period.
It's a question of mentality somehow.
That is the mentality, a mentality which I understand to a certain extent, which said this: we used to be, as a small island, a major world power, and now economically we depend on our ex-colony, the United States. Politically, we're members of a club in which the dominant power, Germany, is the nation, the force that we fought with and won in 2 wars. Now that is part of a wider mentality of a nation that is in decline after the end of colonialism. They were expelled from Africa, from Asia, they went back to their island. So that is the basis. However, as it happens in Hungary or in Germany or in Italy, it was extreme right-wing politicians that, based on that general malaise, cultural malaise of a nation and the people, that suddenly found themselves in a very unclear position in the world. People who were being told that, you know, we are the great power, the great culture, the great civilization, the great business people and so on. It was the right-wing politicians who at some point come and say, you know, our decline, the fact that we're now a second-rate power is because of the immigrants. The immigrants are coming in and they are stealing our jobs and they're stealing our places in hospitals and in universities and schools and so on. It was a lie, and it is a lie all over Europe. Europe, speaking about certainly my part of the world, is demographically declining. And to the extent that this demographic decline cannot be contained from within the nation, you need the immigrants. These are the people, dynamic people, who many of them, like me, did not return to their country. And of course it is a great problem for our countries that we lose our best minds. But for the British or the Germans, this is precisely the population that brings a new dynamism, and you know, the best minds are going there.
So, Europe will have to face these challenges, of course, and to find a way to find the best solution for them. Our TV program, actually, Agenda 35, is dedicated to promoting the European standards and how important integration of North Macedonia into the European Union is. So, in that sense, still, do you believe that European Union is still the best solution for these parts of the world and the countries of the Balkans?
Listen,
with all these problems on the table.
With all these problems, no single power managed to rule the Balkans for a very long period of time. We have all this wonderful richness of nations and languages and religions and cultures. We are a proper multicultural region of the world. So nobody, no single power, not the Ottomans, not the Austrians, not the Russians, could ever stay as the single force that rules this place. Because other powers would come in, or national liberation wars and movements would come in. And to that extent, an integration that goes through the European Union is extremely important, and therefore an integration through a multinational and multicultural union entity like the European Union is, I think, the best future.
But you said this fear of the European Union for having the integration process in mind can be a really bad signal, especially for North Macedonia, having in mind the agreement, the Prespa agreement and the deal with Greece. People will probably feel that there is no valorization of the efforts that was made.
I totally agree. And let me start by saying one thing about the Prespa agreement. This agreement went against, backed the trend that we see all over Europe and in our area towards nationalism. You know, it backed the trend. Yes. It went exactly against it.
Yeah, it's the opposite of what's happening in the EU.
Exactly the opposite. And in that sense, I think the welcoming by all the great European nations and powers of the agreement is a positive sign. You see, the agreement has created a window of opportunity. It happened in a window of opportunity, having Zaev and Tsipras as the leaders of the two people who were able, to bring to an end this long and festering dispute. But it creates a window of opportunity for the rest of our region. There is a momentum at this point. I hope that this momentum, that the leaders of the other Balkan nations see how the world is welcoming those attempts to try and create agreements based on the recognition and respect for the dignity of the other party. This, for me, is the philosophical ground of the Prespa agreement. And I think other nations, other forces, in our region will realize that this momentum, that this model that has been created by the Prespa agreement should be now magnified and should be transferred from us to Kosovo and Serbia, to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to Albania. We're too close to the period of the wars, the Yugoslav wars. We're too close to seeing our brothers and our sisters kill each other. That is not the future. Our future is economic, political and cultural integration, hopefully through the European Union, and certainly the future of North Macedonia and Greece is precisely to become the center of a new spirit of friendship, of economic co-development, of being with each other and doing things together, because we are very close as people.
Maybe we need more accidental politicians for that.
Yes.
Probably.
Probably. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time and for being here.
Thank you.